Bikers mock a disabled veteran. When he stands up, they freeze in terror. The rumble of motorcycles filled the air, a sound so familiar it almost felt like a constant hum in the background of everyday life. The bikers had gathered at a local cafe, their bikes lined up like soldiers, engines roaring as if announcing their arrival to the world. The group was rowdy, loud, and their leather jackets adorned with patches and insignia marked them as a force to be reckoned with, at least in their own minds. They were the kind of group that thrived on intimidation, using their size, their bikes, and their fearsome attitude to get what they wanted. To them, everyone was either a threat or an easy target. And today it was the latter. As the bikers strutted across the parking lot, their eyes were drawn to the lone figure sitting at the bench near the edge of the lot. He was older than most, his back hunched and his posture stiff as he sat in a military uniform, faded with age. His cap, worn but still carrying the insignia of his service, sat firmly on his head. The old man, a disabled veteran, had been sitting there for a while, looking out at the world around him with quiet contemplation. The bikers, drunk on their bravado, saw something else entirely. "Hey, look at this guy," one of them sneered, pointing towards the old man. "What's a washed-up old man like him doing out here all alone? Shouldn't he be at some nursing home by now?" Laughter rippled through the group. The veteran didn't respond, his gaze still fixed ahead, as though he hadn't heard the taunts. But it only encouraged the bikers more. "You see, old man, you're not welcome here," another biker shouted as he walked toward him, tapping the edge of his boot on the ground with every step. "What are you even doing in that uniform? Are you still playing soldier?" The bikers circled around the veteran, their mocking voices growing louder, their movements more aggressive. One of them pushed the veteran's wheelchair slightly, causing the old man to lose his balance for a second. His hand instinctively reached out to steady himself, but he said nothing. "Look at him," one biker said, getting closer. "What, you think your uniform still means something? You're a relic, a pathetic joke." Another biker crouched down in front of the old man, a smug grin on his face. "You don't deserve any respect. Not anymore." The veteran sat motionless, his face a mask of calm. There was no visible sign of anger or fear, just an undeniable, quiet strength that seemed to emanate from him. But the bikers weren't done. The leader, a man with a thick beard and tattoos crawling up his arms, stepped forward. He placed a boot on the bench next to the old man, bending down to meet his eyes. "You hear me, old man? You got anything to say for yourself? Or are you just too weak to stand up for yourself?" The old man didn't flinch. His breathing was steady, his eyes distant. It was clear to the bikers that he wasn't reacting to their words. He wasn't afraid, and that irritated them even more. "Go ahead. Make your move," the leader taunted. "Show us what you've got. We'll see if you've still got any fight left in you." There was a slight tremble in the old man's hand as he reached for the armrest of his wheelchair. But it wasn't a tremble of fear, it was a tremble of something else. A quiet, unshakable resolve that hadn't been there just moments before. The bikers noticed it, and for a brief second, the tension in the air shifted. But they didn't see it for what it was. They saw only a frail old man who they believed couldn't fight back. "You're pathetic," the leader spat, standing up and backing away from the bench. "I don't even know why I'm wasting my time with you." And with that, the group of bikers turned their backs, walking toward their bikes and revving their engines, eager to leave. But the veteran, still sitting there, didn't budge. The weight of the moment hung in the air. The bikers were used to getting away with everything, mocking people, bullying, asserting dominance. But something felt different this time. The old man had said nothing, but his silence carried a message. The leader of the bikers, now sitting atop his motorcycle, looked over his shoulder one last time. He watched the old man for a long moment, and a slow, mocking grin spread across his face. "You're lucky," he muttered. "I don't have time to waste on you." And with that, the bikers roared off into the distance, leaving the old man alone. The veteran, still sitting in his wheelchair, looked out at the road ahead, his face a mask of quiet dignity. But the storm inside him had just begun to stir. The roar of the bikers' engines faded into the distance, but the quiet that followed felt anything but peaceful. The old man remained sitting in his wheelchair, his hands still resting on the armrests, his gaze unwavering. The taunts and insults had been harsh, but the worst part had been their complete disregard for the years of service he had given, years that had shaped his entire life. He remained still for a long moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. His weathered hands, once strong and sure, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the emotions that had been building up for years. His time in the military had shaped him, taught him discipline, but it had also taught him how to endure. Endure when it felt like the world had turned its back on you. Endure when it seemed like nobody cared. The old man's eyes glistened with memories. Memories of his service, of the comrades he had lost, of the battles fought and won. He had lived a life that most of the bikers could never understand. But he wasn't going to sit here and let them mock him, let them walk away thinking they had the upper hand. With a slow, deliberate motion, the old man shifted in his wheelchair. His right hand gripped the armrest, and with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep within, he began to push himself up. His legs, weakened by years of disuse, protested, but he ignored the pain. He had learned to ignore pain long ago. For the first time that evening, he stood slowly, steadily, his old boots finding purchase on the ground. His body trembled slightly, not from the physical effort, but from the emotional surge. The old man hadn't stood up for anyone in a long time, but tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't going to let anyone take away his dignity. His eyes scanned the now empty parking lot. The bikers were gone, but the memory of their mocking faces lingered, like a bitter taste he couldn't shake off. He took a deep breath and straightened himself, squaring his shoulders as if ready to face whatever challenge came next. As the night grew colder, the streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the ground. The old man adjusted his cap, pulling it down firmly. The faint sound of tires screeching in the distance echoed through the night, a reminder that the bikers weren't gone for good. The old man knew they would be back. He could feel it in his bones. The way they had looked at him, the way they had ridiculed him, it wasn't over. Not until they understood that he was more than just an old man sitting in a chair. And so he waited. As time passed, the faint sounds of the night grew quieter. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension almost palpable. The sound of a distant engine broke the silence, growing louder, closer, until the familiar rumble of motorcycles reached the old man's ears. This time, he didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He stood firm, his gaze fixed on the parking lot as the bikers returned. They had regrouped, and their engines roared louder than before, an angry reminder that they had unfinished business. The leader of the bikers, with his leather jacket and tattoos, led the group back into the lot. His eyes immediately locked onto the old man, sitting in the same spot, his posture unwavering. The leader's face twisted into a sneer as he approached. "Still here, huh?" he called out, his voice dripping with derision. "Thought I told you to go home, old man. You really want to make this hard on yourself?" The old man didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the leader, steady and unwavering. His hand clenched around the wheels of his wheelchair, the only movement coming from the muscles in his arms as they tightened in preparation. "Why don't you just take your old ass and leave?" the leader taunted, taking a step closer, his boots thudding on the ground with each step. "You don't belong here. Nobody wants you here." The old man inhaled deeply, his breath steady. His legs wavered slightly, but his body remained firm. "Maybe I don't belong here," the old man said quietly, his voice low but steady. "But you've forgotten something. You never get to decide where someone belongs. Not me. Not anyone." The leader's face twisted with anger as he reached out to shove the old man. But before his hand could make contact, the old man moved with a speed and strength that no one had expected. In one fluid motion, the old man planted his feet firmly on the ground, pushing himself forward with a force that knocked the leader back. The bikers, who had been circling, froze in place, their eyes wide in shock. The old man, his back straight, stood tall for the first time in a long while. The leader stumbled, his hand instinctively reaching for his bike to regain his balance. His expression shifted from cocky confidence to disbelief as he realized what had just happened. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. The old man stood in front of him now, taller and prouder than he had seemed sitting in that chair. His eyes met the leaders, and for the first time, the bikers saw something they hadn't anticipated. A man who had been through more than they could ever imagine. "You'll leave now," the old man said firmly, "or I'll make you." The night air was thick with the sound of the old man's words still hanging in the air. The bikers, all gathered around, had just witnessed something they hadn't expected. For the first time, they were faced with a man who wasn't afraid of them. A man who had faced far greater challenges than their bravado could ever provide. The leader of the group, who had once been so confident, now found himself speechless, his hands shaking ever so slightly. He stood there, staring at the old man as if trying to process what had just happened. The old man, still standing tall, held the leader's gaze. His hands, though weathered and scarred, were steady. His legs, though they trembled under the strain, carried him with a dignity the bikers hadn't anticipated. There was no defiance in his posture, no anger in his eyes, just a quiet, unshakable strength. "I didn't want this to be difficult," the old man said, his voice clear but not loud. "I never wanted trouble, but you've pushed me into a corner." The leader opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words caught in his throat. His usual sharp tongue was silenced by the realization that the old man wasn't someone to be toyed with. There was no fear in the veteran's eyes, only the silent knowledge of someone who had survived more than they could imagine. The bikers around him were beginning to feel the shift in the atmosphere. The brash confidence they had walked in with was slipping away, replaced by uncertainty. One by one, they took a step back, their eyes darting between the old man and the leader, who stood frozen in place. "What the hell is going on?" one of the bikers muttered, his voice low as if unsure of what to say next. "Are we just going to stand here and take this?" another asked, his tone filled with unease. But the leader, still trying to regain his composure, snapped, "Shut up, we've got this. We just need to teach him a lesson." But his voice was shaky now, and the conviction was gone. The bikers, sensing the tension, looked from their leader to the old man and back again. The power dynamic had shifted in a way that none of them had seen coming. The old man stood silently for a moment longer before speaking again. "I don't want any more trouble," he said, his words calm and deliberate. "I've lived through enough to know what kind of men you are. And I know that this," he gestured to the group of bikers, "isn't the way forward for any of you." The leader's face contorted with frustration, but he couldn't deny what the old man was saying. His usual bravado was crumbling in the face of the veteran's resilience. "Don't make me laugh," the leader said, but his voice lacked the fire it once had. "You think you're some kind of hero? Some old war hero who still commands respect?" The old man took a step forward, unwavering. "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn," he said firmly, locking eyes with the leader. "And right now, you haven't earned mine." The bikers were completely still now. The tension was palpable, each of them trying to figure out how to react to the unexpected turn of events. The silence between them and the old man felt heavy, almost suffocating. Suddenly, the leader turned away, muttering under his breath, "This is a joke. I can't believe I'm wasting my time here." One by one, the other bikers started to follow their leader's lead, mounting their motorcycles and revving the engines, but none of them could make eye contact with the old man. They were no longer the confident, threatening group that had circled him just minutes ago. They were now unsure, unsettled by the realization that they had crossed a line they couldn't erase. The leader, now sitting on his bike, looked back one last time, his face flushed with embarrassment and frustration. "You're lucky tonight," he spat, though there was no conviction in his words. "We won't forget this." The old man didn't respond, his face calm as ever. He stood there in the parking lot, his body still steady despite the tremors in his legs. He didn't need to say anything more. His silence spoke volumes. Without another word, the bikers sped off, their engines roaring loudly into the night. The sound of their motorcycles faded as they disappeared into the distance, but the old man remained standing, unmoved. His eyes followed them for a moment, then turned back to the now empty parking lot. He breathed in deeply, letting the cool air fill his lungs. The tension of the moment had passed, but the weight of what had just happened lingered. He had stood up for himself, something he hadn't done in a long time. And in doing so, he had shown not only the bikers but also himself that he was still a force to be reckoned with. The roar of the motorcycles had faded into the distance, but the silence left behind was almost unbearable. The old man stood in the parking lot, his body trembling slightly with the effort of standing, but his face remained calm. His eyes were distant, as though he were reflecting on something far beyond the immediate situation. He had fought many battles in his life, but this one was different. It wasn't a battle of weapons or force. It was a battle of pride, of dignity, and of standing up for oneself after so many years of silence. He breathed in deeply, the cool evening air filling his lungs, and as he exhaled, a sense of peace washed over him. He had faced those bikers, those intimidating, arrogant men without flinching, and for the first time in years, he felt like he had regained something he had lost long ago. His sense of power, his sense of self-worth. As the sounds of the bikers' engines grew quieter, the old man sat back down in his wheelchair, his movements deliberate, as if savoring the stillness of the moment. He adjusted his cap and straightened his military jacket, the faded insignia catching the light of the street lamps. He had worn this uniform proudly once, and though it no longer had the same meaning it once did, he still carried it with pride. But just as he was about to turn and leave, something caught his attention. Another sound. This time, it wasn't the rumble of motorcycles, but the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps growing closer with each passing second. The old man didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He could feel the presence behind him, a weight in the air that had shifted again. This time it was different. It wasn't the sound of more bikers looking for trouble, but something else entirely. A shadow loomed over him, and the old man turned slowly to face the newcomer. Standing there, just beyond the reach of the streetlight, was a figure he hadn't expected to see. A man, tall, with a rough exterior, dressed in dark clothing, and with a look of determination in his eyes. "I didn't expect you to still be here," the man said, his voice low and measured. "I thought you'd run off with the others." The old man studied him for a moment, then slowly nodded. "You're not like them," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his legs. "You're not here to mock me, are you?" The man shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "No, I'm not here to mock you." The old man's gaze softened slightly, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "Then what do you want?" The man stepped closer, his boots echoing on the pavement as he moved. "I saw what you did," he said, his voice carrying a weight of respect now. "You stood your ground when no one else would. That's something rare these days." The old man remained silent, but his expression was unreadable. The newcomer could see the pride and the pain behind the veteran's eyes, and it stirred something in him, a sense of admiration and understanding. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," the man continued. "I've been where you are. I've seen what you've seen, and I know what it takes to fight, what it really takes." The old man's face softened, his eyes looking away for a brief moment. He had fought so many battles in his life, some of them on distant shores, others in the quiet corners of his mind. He had seen friends fall, he had witnessed atrocities, and he had lived with the weight of those memories every day. But it was the battle with himself, his own doubts, his own pain, that had always been the hardest. The man stepped closer still, now standing directly in front of the old man. He lowered his voice, his tone serious. "What you did tonight, it wasn't just about standing up to those bikers. It was about reclaiming your dignity. It's about showing the world that you're still here, that you still matter." The old man met his gaze again, and for the first time, he saw something in the stranger's eyes, a recognition, a shared understanding. The man wasn't just speaking to him, he was speaking for him, for everything he had endured, everything he had lost. And for the first time, the old man didn't feel so alone. "I didn't think I had it in me anymore," the old man admitted, his voice quiet but filled with truth. "It's been so long since I stood up for myself. I thought those days were behind me." The man nodded. "I understand. I've been there too. Sometimes we forget that we still have something to fight for, that we still have something worth standing up for." There was a long pause, and the old man's gaze lingered on the man before him. For a brief moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A connection, a sense of camaraderie. It wasn't just about the confrontation with the bikers anymore. It was about the recognition of something deeper. The old man looked up at the man, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing me." The man smiled, then a small, knowing smile. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just reminding you of what you already know. You're still here and you still matter." The two of them stood there in the quiet parking lot, the sounds of the night returning to normal. But for the old man, the world felt different now. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared, but it felt lighter, somehow. The bikers' insults, their taunts, their threats, none of it mattered anymore. Because in that moment, he realized that the true battle wasn't about defending himself against others. It was about finding the strength to stand on his own, regardless of what anyone else thought. And for the first time in a long time, the old man smiled. A small, faint smile, but one filled with the quiet pride of someone who had fought the hardest battle of all. The battle to never give up. The night had fallen deeper, and the city's hum continued in the distance. But for the old man, time seemed to have slowed. The events of the past hour had shifted something inside him, something he hadn't realized he'd lost until that very moment. As he sat there in his wheelchair, the weight of his years no longer felt as heavy. He wasn't just the aging veteran anymore. He was a man who had found his strength again, not through force or power, but through his unwavering spirit. The man who had approached him earlier stood silently beside him, his presence a silent acknowledgement of what had just occurred. Neither man spoke for a moment. There was no need for words. The old man had regained more than just his stance. He had reclaimed a piece of himself that he thought was long gone. The stranger, sensing the weight of the moment, gave the old man a respectful nod. "You've earned that victory," he said quietly, his voice carrying the sincerity of someone who understood. "You showed them what real strength looks like." The old man nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the empty parking lot. The bikers were long gone, their motorcycles fading into the distance. Yet, the echoes of the encounter remained, not in the noise or the confrontation, but in the quiet, in the understanding. He had fought a battle not for himself, but for something deeper, something that had always been with him, even when he didn't know it. The old man looked up at the sky, his eyes scanning the stars that were slowly making their appearance. A breeze stirred the leaves around them, a reminder of the world that continued on, indifferent to the struggles of any single person. But for the old man, the world felt different now. He wasn't just part of it. He was still here, still standing, still fighting. "You know," the old man said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "it's been a long time since I felt like I mattered. I've seen so much, lost so much, that sometimes it feels like I've become a shadow of who I was." The stranger turned to face him fully, his expression softening. "You matter more than you think," he said simply. "You've fought for more than just your country. You've fought for your dignity, your strength, and your right to be seen. And that's something that can never be taken away from you." The old man met his gaze, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the truth in the words. He had spent years believing that his battle was over, that his worth had been defined by the scars of his past. But tonight, he had realized something far more powerful. His legacy was not just in the battles he had fought, but in the quiet courage it took to stand up, no matter how many times life knocked him down. The stranger clapped him gently on the shoulder, his tone warm and encouraging. "You've got a lot of fight left in you," he said. "More than most people ever realize." The old man's lips curled into a faint smile. "Maybe I do," he murmured, feeling the weight on his shoulders lighten ever so slightly. "Maybe I've got more than enough to keep going." As the stranger turned to leave, he paused, glancing back at the old man. "Take care of yourself," he said. "And don't forget, You've still got a lot of living to do." The old man watched as the stranger walked away, his figure growing smaller in the distance. He wasn't sure where the man had come from or why he had chosen to speak to him, but he felt a sense of gratitude, a sense of camaraderie with someone who understood the quiet battles of life. The night was settling into a peaceful calm, and for the first time in years, the old man didn't feel like a relic of the past. He felt like a man who had been through much, but who had finally found his peace in the present. His body may have been frail, his legs weakened, but his spirit, his resolve, was as strong as it had ever been. And as he pushed himself gently forward in his wheelchair, ready to leave the parking lot, he felt something in his chest that hadn't been there before. Hope. Hope that even in the face of adversity he could stand strong. Hope that the world still had a place for someone like him. The roar of a distant motorcycle reached his ears, but this time, he didn't feel the anger or fear that had once accompanied it. Instead, he smiled faintly, knowing that he had faced down the world and come out stronger on the other side.